Well, Pádraig, I'm Paddy, founder of 12 Acres Brewing Company. We're here in Collection, your home parish. Yeah, that's me.
So my name is David Walsh Chemist. This is Paddy the Gavin Brewing Company, and the name is it's funny because some people love the name and some people think it's a bit too long. But this is Paddy the Gavin Farm.
I'm Brian O'Neill. I'm one of three brothers who set up Our Brother Brewing.
I'm Barry. I'm the main brother, the biggest, boldest brother.
I'm Rich. I am the brewer.
Rich is our adopted brother.
Richard Siberry, founder, head brewer, chief bottle washer, just general dog's body at Black Donkey Brewing in Roscommon.
Interesting times and wild, but you always be wild, never so wild. You can't be free. It's wild, but you always be wild, never so wild. You can't be free. Don't let them control your mind.
Well, I was working as a quantity surveyor back in the noughties, and when the crash came along, myself and my wife, we went travelling and travelled the world, did about 18 months, and I got into the craft beers. And when I got home then, work was scarce, so I was working with the brother here on the farm. Ian has a farm here, he grows malt and barley, and he has a sheep and tillage enterprise. So I started home brewing. I got into that and really enjoyed it. And myself and Ian, my father was actually keen to do something with the water here because it was really good quality water, and he was keen to do something with it. And we looked at doing different things like bottled water and things like that. But when I started getting into home brewing, then I started looking at it maybe as a viable business, on-farm business. And myself and Ian looked into it, and Ian grows malt and barley for Minch Malt and Athy, which goes mainly into Guinness. So I shouldn't be saying Guinness, should I? But so we really good water, really good malt and barley. So we had basically 95% of the ingredients you need for beer. So I was home brewing, and I got onto a course then in the Institute of Brewing and Distilling and did a certificate in brewing. And so I did that, and I passed the exam somehow, and still home brewing. And we looked into, we wanted to use our own barley, which is, it hadn't been done at the time. And so it kind of gives an angle of provenance and traceability that we hadn't seen, So we went to Minch Malt in Athy and asked them would they be able to malt a batch of our barley separate, because normally it just goes in, mixed in with all the other farmers, and comes out the other end, you don't know what's what. So what we asked them to do, could they malt 100 tons of our barley separately, and then through the maltings comes out the other end, and we know that malt then is from this farm. So in fairness to them, they got on board with it, and that was the starting point, really.
Well, it was a circuitous kind of route that took me here. I'm Irish. I'm from Drogheda. I left Ireland in 1986 or thereabouts. Yeah, it'd be about 1986, and kind of went off as a lot of my generation did. Took what bit of education I had at the time and went off to try and see where the world would welcome me. And I ended up in the UK for a number of years. But prior to that, I was working in France for a while. And when I was working in France, I was first exposed to sort of different beer back in, and I remembered specifically the summer 1985. It was the first time I had a Hefeweizen, which was something very, very different from what you were going to find in an Irish pub back in the mid to late 80s. And, that was a kind of a one and done thing. The journey went on. I went to college in the UK, ended up working there for about 7 years. And eventually, 1993, I got a green card and went to live in the States to see what was going on over there. And I was heading for the Pacific Northwest. That was the plan. but the plane landed in JFK, and sort of, once you get into New York, it's a hard place to live, but it's an even harder place to leave. So I ended up spending about 20 years in New York City and around Long Island, that sort of area. And when I was there, I met a woman from Roscommon, from Castlereagh. And after a couple of years, she said, right, it's time for a move. And I said, yeah, okay, let's go to Vancouver. And she said, no, we're going back to Roscommon. We're going to Castlereagh. So, being a dutiful husband, I packed my bags and trolleyed along behind her. And here we are, and sort of came home. And I was always curious coming home on holidays, having seen how in the States in particular, when I arrived there, your average bar sold Bud and Miller and Coors and Rolling Rock and maybe something exotic and imported. But there was really no variety. It was a flat line, very much like it was here in Ireland. And over time, you just saw that variety growing and growing and growing until almost in some bars too much variety, 40, 50 taps. But it wasn't happening here. And I was very curious, why wasn't it happening here? Ireland has a reputation as a beer nation, but it's kind of founded on the back of basically one brand that's been a foreign-owned brand for most of my lifetime in reality. Still made here, but it's just a brand of a big multinational corporation. And I kind of thought, there must be something more to this brewing than meets the eye if we're not able to keep up with the rest of the world. So I tried my hand at it as an amateur, set up a homebrew kit in the garage in New York, and met other brewers, home brewers, and then professional brewers, and started going to professional, commercial breweries and learning a bit of trade and a bit of practice and whatnot. And eventually, when the orders were given to head home, I had already set my mind that if I ever moved home, I was going to set up a brewery, because I thought Ireland was ready for, something new, something different, a bit of variety. And that happened in December 1st, 2012. I landed back on Irish soil, and the brewery became operational in June of 2014. So it was a bit of setup involved, yeah.
Yeah, it's I suppose for me it's a great privilege to be here 13 generations after we moved here, but it's a bit of a responsibility as well, because we've had all these other family members who've looked after the place, and I kind of feel now it's my job to look after it. The Walshes came in with the Normans, so back in the 1170s, and they were the Welshmen. That's what they were known as, because that's where they came from, and that sort of kind of gradually evolved into Walsh. We settled in down around Jerpoint Abbey, and if you go in there, you'll still see tombs with Walsh on them, or Brannock on them, which is the Irish name for Walsh. And then around 1638, 1639, one of my ancestors came here and bought this place. We're very lucky. I'd say he was a bit not delighted with it, but we're very lucky that in 1641, a couple of years later, there was a big rebellion around here. So there's a big 3-page document up in Trinity with. He's basically gone up and written down a deposition of all the things that happened to him. So from our point of view, it's great, because we actually have a bit of history from him back 380 odd years ago. So he's complaining about all the barley that was stolen from here. He seemed to be working up in the forecourts up in Dublin, and his gold chest was stolen. His servant ran away and joined the rebellion. But for me, it's just lovely, because at the end of it, it's his actual signature. So someone else had actually written down the deposition, but his signature is on it. So for me, it's just nice to have that little connection back to the past. And after that, it just passed down through the generations, and we've had some very good people here who ran the place really well. We've had a few people here who didn't run the place very well, and there's a couple of generations where it's kind of touch and go whether it stays viable or not. But I've been very lucky that there's been 3 really good generations in front of me. So my dad, my grandfather, and my great grandfather ran the place really well. So as I say, it's down to me now, and I reckon keep the family history going, so I can put a brewery together, do a few other bits and pieces, and then if it all falls apart, then hopefully the 3 generations after me can tidy up after me.
I think it was probably a collective thing. One night, I think we've tracked it back to a night at the Irish Craft Beer Festival in 2011, when the plan was formally hatched to start our own brewery, probably over a few too many pints, I'd say. But I think we were at a point in our lives at that stage where we all wanted to do something for ourselves, but didn't really realise that we did until we kind of got together and said we'd like to leave our 9-to-5s behind and set out on our own. And that was the fateful night that we decided to set up Oh Brother Brewing. It took us 3 years since then, so from that point until we got going, set up at the back end of 2014 here in beautiful County Wicklow, and we're here ever since.
Yeah, I mean, the real interest for me was because we were growing the barley here, you grow the malting barley, you'd sell it to Minch, but that was kind of the end of it. You never really saw anything that happened after that. We were aware that, in theory it goes up to James's Gate, it's getting made into beers up there, but you never really saw what happened to it after that. So I was just interested in what were they doing to the barley in terms of getting it malted, getting it made into beers, and I started off very, very simple. I always went all grain, so I wasn't using the extract kits, but it was a very simple kit of a plastic bucket and a bag and some hot water, and that was about the extent of it. So it took a bit of time to get anything successful and drinkable out of it, but it was probably mainly pale ales, and I was never, at that stage of my life I wasn't really an IPA fan, so it was more probably kind of pale ales. And then in the winter maybe do some darker beers as well, and then gradually evolved over time, just try a few different styles out and try different recipes out. I was always a fan of the maltier beers, so I might try something like a Belgian style beer, get sort of higher gravities, higher alcohols, and get the Belgian yeasts involved as well. So for me, that was always the style of beer I quite liked. My wife's from Scotland, so I quite liked some of the Scottish beers as well, the heavies or the 80 shillings or something like that, which again, they're more based probably around the malt than around the hops. But I suppose more just before we were starting to build the brewery here, started to get more into the hops as well, and obviously the different flavours you can get from them.
I was actually a commercial brewer before I started homebrewing. Then started homebrewing. Then once I had a job there in California, realizing that homebrewing is a lot harder than commercial brewing. You've still got the same amount of time to produce a beer, but the mess is in your house.
In your kitchen?
In your kitchen, yeah, or on the floors. But yeah, I learned a lot from homebrewing, and that then translated into what I was doing at work as well. You can experiment a bit more at home. It's not a commercial product that you have to push on anyone, so you can make weird stuff if you want.
So you were brewing in California before you started homebrewing?
Yeah, with no temperature control and very hot temperatures. But that worked out. Learned a lot. But,
Yeah.
It worked out. You're here with us.
yeah. And some of the beers I did ended up being produced here, like Hook, the Saison.
Yeah.
That was when
Yeah.
homebrew.
Yeah.
That got translated up to the commercial scale and produced and sold.
Yeah, we can definitely say that Rich brought a lot of his experience from California to the brewery, and certainly stepped up the beer, the quality and range of beers that we were producing. I mean, we were certainly at the time we were kind of out there on the Irish scene in terms of the hoppiness and the ABV and the aggressive kind of flavours of the beer, but I definitely think the experience that Rich brought back from California added a huge amount to that and refined it, and has helped make us what we are today.
There was definitely a skills and experience deficit in the country,
Yeah.
especially at that time. There wasn't really any brewing courses unless you went to the UK, and then that was very kind of traditional education.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas in the States, the scene has been going so long, everyone knows what they're doing over there. So it's good to be able to bring that back and use it here.
Into practice, yeah.
We were home brewing, the three of us, myself, Brian and Paddy, who it doesn't work here on a day-to-day basis, but we were brewing down in Dad's big shed at home.
25-litre kit.
Started off, yeah, we got pretty advanced with some of the equipment then as we stepped it up from.
It was very basic in the beginning, looking back.
Well,
on
like
it,
everybody was very
Yeah, it
basic,
was,
but
for
it
sure.
it was a really good testing ground. I mean, I was working in the bank in finance in the IFSC, so we were homebrewing at the weekend, refining the recipes. We rented some space in a unit up the road here for a while and got a bigger kit and started refining the recipes, and I was bringing all the beer into work to people to sample. It's amazing how many new friends you get when you're bringing in beer to work all the time. But we did, a couple of hundred maybe batches of beer. We're brewing every weekend, a couple of batches every weekend. Some of them were absolutely amazing, and some of them as any homebrewer will know, were absolutely disastrous. But it's certainly good to make your mistakes.
You still drink it all. Even if it's awful.
Most of it. You give some of it away.
You give away the really rough stuff and to the people that you don't want to hang around with too long. But yeah, I mean, you definitely want to make your mistakes and get your learning when you've got, you know, maybe 50 or 100 small bottles rather than, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 liters of beer. So we did that and we had fun, and you can have a lot more fun when you're not restricted by having to sell it. You can try different styles, kind of more random styles that are maybe less popular, that you can, you know, just fool around with, throwing in different ingredients, fruits or spices or things like that, and just really playing around with it. So it's a great learning experience.
It was great learning.
fun.
That when we had that space rented in the unit up the road was when it stepped up for us. We you know, we had a designated space to brew. It wasn't in the kitchen. It wasn't, you know, hidden away or whatever. It was, you know, where we went to brew. So
Yeah.
I mean, the processes remained the same, large scale, small scale. You still have to clean everything. You still have to, you know, go through all that. So it educated us big time in terms of what we went on to do on the commercial scale.
Yeah, it definitely was great to have the space, because I think as any home brewer will know, when you get seriously into it, like any hobby, your equipment just grows and grows, and then you're trying to find space and
Then you
takes
have to
over
cook
your
the dinner.
house. And
You have to try and cook the dinner.
Well, I mean, brewing at this level in a microbrewery is basically home brewing scaled up. You know, it's the exact same process. So we use our own water, our own barley, no additives, no preservatives, no chemicals added. It's just brewing the old way, but with good heat and good cooling technology that you can cool a beer quickly, and you know, good hygiene obviously is critical. So that was it. I was tweaking around with recipes at home in the garage. I was in the kitchen first until she kicked me out to the garage, and then she kicked me out of the garage up to the shed. So, but yeah, it's the same. It's the exact same. Like I was brewing, the pale ale was our flagship beer. Like I said, it was an American style pale ale, not a full IPA, not too bitter, nicely balanced. You know, so I was able to brew that in a small kit, and that's what we scaled up to the big kit here in the brewery, you know.
It was, I knew nothing about it, if the truth be told. I knew I liked to drink beer. I went through college consuming copious quantities of beer, as any good college student does, I think. And when I got curious about why Ireland didn't have a craft brewing scene or an indigenous brewing industry, I started looking into the mechanism of making beer. So I remember I watched this YouTube video of a guy homebrewing, and I walked away from that video and I thought to myself, okay, so that's why people aren't making beer en masse, because it looked kind of shite, not to put too fine a point on it. It's the brewing beer, certainly if you're looking from the outside and you don't quite understand what's going on, it's not particularly glamorous or sexy or exciting or what have you. And this particular YouTube video, you know, this was 15, maybe 20 years ago, and YouTube technology and home filmmaking technology wasn't where it is today, and the guy was probably shooting it on a Super 8 camera or something like that, and his production values were not exciting. And so anyway, but not being one to walk away from a challenge, I said, well, that looked like shite, maybe I can do it better. So I went out and I bought a homebrew kit. The first kit was kind of a pre-packaged thing, and you boil it on the stovetop and like that. And it was all right, but I suppose it was good enough to encourage me to try something better. And I've always been into sort of tinkering and engineering. And when you get into the guts of brewing, you've got biology, you've got chemistry, you've got physics, you've got engineering, you've got all the kind of things that check the boxes for somebody like me in particular. And once I got into it, I found it was almost addictive. The process itself is actually very sexy if you're into that kind of thing. And you know, I ended up with a kit that basically is exactly the same as a commercial kit out there, just on a much smaller scale. And was brewing away happily in the garage in New York, experimenting with things, meeting other brewers, learning all the time, absorbing, exchanging ideas and all this kind of thing. And I remember one guy that I brewed with, and he had a yeast, a Saison yeast, and at the time I don't think I even knew what a Saison was, but he had brewed this Saison style beer, which is a Belgian style, and he'd harvested yeast from it, and he said, look, I have pitches of yeast for anybody who wants to try it. So I said, yeah, I'll put my hand up, I'll give that a try. I didn't know what it was, but I said I'd give it a try. And I brewed my first Saison, and I was just bowled over. And I went, this is beer. This is what it's really all about. Hops my arse. This is beer. Malt, water, yeast. That's what it's meant to be. And hops, yes, but not hops as a showstopper. So then I started looking more into Saison and what were they, where did they come from, what was their history, what was their, their use of what was their place in beer drinking society. And I said to myself, that's the beer that Ireland needs. That's what's going to work. It's a great food accompanying beer. We have some of the most fantastic ingredients in the world in Ireland. And when I left Ireland in 1986 or thereabouts, I was always very much into food. I grew up on the banks of the Boyne. We used to go down to the beach down in Mornington and that. We used to get razor clams, and you could get various varieties of clams on the beach, and you could fish, and you could do mushrooms, and there was sloes, and there was crab apples. Autumn was a phenomenal time for me, foraging and that. But you couldn't convince anybody else to eat it, and you couldn't convince anybody else to pay for it. And I left Ireland in 1986 with the kind of conclusion that we had the best ingredients and the worst consumers and the worst chefs in the world. I mean, it was just, you could probably have bought a boiled T-bone in 1986 in Ireland. Now, I think Ireland's food game is world class, absolutely up there with the best in the world. But our drinks game was really, really lacking. And I said, maybe this is what is going to kind of elevate the status. And this is an indigenous, local produced, low carbon miles, phenomenal product that will pair phenomenally with Ireland's ingredients and Ireland's super talented chefs that we have today. And so that was kind of why I decided to go down the Saison route and not brew a stout. There was no shortage of stout in Ireland, and there happens to be a stout that, well, let's face it, it rules the roost and is very hard to compete with. So I wasn't going to get into that ring. I wasn't particularly interested in brewing super hoppy beers. I like to consume them. I don't care to produce them. And so, yeah, we focused on Saison-style beers, yeast and malt-focused beers primarily, and they're phenomenal food accompaniment beers. They're good. They're good on their own. They're good with good company. They're good with a good film. They're just good, easy drinking, pure beer, the way beer's supposed to be in my book.
So I suppose when we're setting up and doing our branding, we got a local company. This gentleman here is our great grandfather, John. He bought. He had some land here in Clonmore, and then he in the early 20s he bought more land up around Collection, and one of the fields is called the 12 Acres Field. So we thought it was a nice name, and it kind of had a nice connection to the land with the name. And he started growing malt and barley for Guinness, and so we thought it was a nice nice ode to him, I suppose. But I don't think he drank, so I don't know if he'd approve.
I think that was something that evolved with us. As Barry said, I mean, we were in a stage of our lives where we weren't probably getting as much fulfillment from our work as we wanted to. So once we decided to go down the Old Brother route, things started to fly around and ideas started to develop then. So Old Brother, obviously the three of us were involved. We are O'Neills, so it was something that came to us and felt that it was right and fitted what we wanted to do, and that's.
I think we threw around a whole load of ideas, and as you do when you're setting up a business, over many pints, and see what sticks. And Old Brother just kind of stuck out. It was O'Neill's Brothers, something to do with the family sort of dynamic there, and the logo kind of came about. We're all really big into art, different types of art, but we were talking to a lot of Irish artists at the time, different artists, about how we might go about branding, and we didn't want to go down the sort of classic focus group generic branding like all the big boys do. So we felt it had to be something very personal and unique to us. So that's why we were kind of talking to smaller artists. The logo itself was designed by a lady called Marion Noon. She's from Sligo. She's a street artist based in Belfast. Her name, or her street name, is, or artist name is Frizz, which is what she'd be well known for. And I suppose the brief for the logo that we gave her was around the three personalities, the three heads, the three sort of individuals, and a sort of a spirit of collaboration, a union, but also having the three different entities, if you like. So she came up with, I don't know if you can see it there, but lots of people pick up different things in it. It's effectively three faces or three heads, but people kind of pick out different things, such as the way with art, like people have said, is it three monkeys, is it 3 pints,
Coffee beans.
being cheers together, you know, from above. So while we love art, I speak for myself, but generally speaking, we lack any real artistic talent. So it was amazing to be able to work with artists and to just put your ideas almost instantly down on paper and, you know, bring it to life. So that's how the logo itself came about, and we've continued to work with the artists and bringing art and street art and different parts of our interests into the beer, onto the labels.
But we continued to work with Marion for a long time after that on all our one-off special beers.
We did actually. She did our first sort of good few beers. The names of the beers are based around personalities and personality types. So we started with the Chancer, the Sinner, the Preacher, and the Fixer. So sort of quirky kind of personalities, aspects of our personalities maybe, or things we would have called each other, the Chancer, your Chancer, or things like that.
Yeah, well, the Griffin was always kind of the logo that we came up with at the very start. So the Griffin is the Walsh family crest. There's a wind vane out in the old yard behind us, which has a griffin on it, and there'd be a few other sort of griffins stamped around the place. So for me, that was kind of the obvious thing to pick as the initial logo. Once we had that, then the bottle range is kind of a nice simple design, so you can see the griffin, and then the colour changes depending on the style of beer. And then when we went into the can market, as you know, if you walk into a supermarket or an off-license, the cans, you have to have sexy graphics on the can, because otherwise they don't stand out against everyone else with sexy graphics. So we went with probably a slightly more dynamic Griffin, but we have the outline of the yard there as well. So it's kind of the modern graphic design, but still trying to tie it back to the history of the place here. And we have the story on the can as well. So it's the story of our own barley and water that we're using, and also the story of the 380 years, the 13 generations of the family that are here. But it's you have to make it that people will pick up a can because they like the look of the can. They'll see the look of the can before they actually know what's in it. So if they don't like the look of the can, they will actually go to something else, even if the beer in it is maybe more to their taste. They will pick up cans that they like the look of first, and then decide on the beer style after that.
So the brand, well, Black Donkey, there's a story. It wasn't taught when I was in school, but my father taught it or told me about it. It's kind of a lyrical sort of story called Mossel Beag Dove. And it's about a guy who buys a donkey, and it's a cute kind of story because he goes to buy the donkey at the fair, and he kind of gets hosed on the deal. But anyway, himself and the donkey form this inseparable bond, and they work in the bog together and all that. It's a great story for kids, and there's a fantastic animation on YouTube of it if you look it up, Mossel Beag Dove. So initially, what we were going to do is we were going to call the brewery Connacht Brewing, and we were going to brew a beer and call it Ossel Dove, and it was going to be a stout. But then once we hit the ground, we realized that trademarking Connacht Brewing wasn't going to be a simple process, possibly impossible. And the country was awash with stouts. Because we are a stout drinking nation, most independent brewers thought they needed to produce a stout to compete. Now most independent brewers will tell you that their stout is actually their lowest seller or their slowest seller. So we scratched that idea and decided we'd call the brewery Ossel Dove. But then we decided if we ever went exporting, that Ossel Dove wasn't going to work very well. So we just translated it. Ossel Dove is Black Donkey in Irish. Turns out that our biggest export market is Russia. And in Russian, a donkey is an oselik. So it's not that different. I'm not sure what black is in Russian. But anyway, so we called it Black Donkey. And the kind of consequence of that was we had a logo designed for us, and then my brother-in-law, who's a fine artist, I went to him and I said, look, I want a first beer is going to be called Sheep Stealer, and I want a picture of a sheep being stolen by a donkey, and there's a farmer in the background and this kind of thing. So we went through a few sketches, and the painting eventually came to life. And what I've discovered subsequently, and this wasn't intentional in the beginning, there are a lot of donkeys around Ireland. I think the donkey's kind of ubiquitous in the Irish landscape. But we all know someone who doesn't like snakes or spiders or dogs or cats. I've yet to meet someone who doesn't like donkeys. Donkeys just have that kind of Eeyore factor, you know? And if you ever see a donkey standing in an Irish field and the rain is dripping off its ears and they look bedraggled, it's a desert animal. It doesn't really belong here. And you just kind of want to give it a hug, you know? And that's actually played very well to us, but it was pure accident. I would love to say that was my marketing genius at work, but it wasn't. It's just, you know, I like donkeys. They're an empathetic kind of an animal. And so to have a donkey as our logo / mascot, just, yeah, it's worked out very well for us. There are some people who look a bit sideways at it, but
I think a lot of it is, I mean, there's a commercial reality of you have to brew beers that people are going to like. So it's all very well brewing beers that I'm going to like, but if no one else wants to drink them, then that's not a very commercially clever idea. So there is, you know, there's obviously a case of looking and seeing what's out there to a certain extent, because you want to try and brew something maybe a little bit different to what other people are doing. You can take inspiration from what other people are doing as well, but maybe you want to do something slightly different to that. We have Joe working here, who is our innovation brewer, so he will do the recipe development for us, and he's like a really, really good home brewer before he came here, and he's made up some fantastic beers for us as well since he's been here. So it's, I suppose, coming up with the initial inspiration. From there, it's actually working it out more or less on paper in terms of what's the water profile going to be, what are the malts going to be, what hops are we going to use, what other additions are we going to use, are we putting in any fruit or any nuts or something like that into it as well. And then we'll work it on the pilot kit. So we have a 50 litre pilot kit out in the brewery. We'll do a trial batch on that and make sure that that's successful, and then if we're happy with that, then we scale it up to the full kit. We're running, I mean, we have about 10 different beers in what I'd call the core range at the minute. So we have our bottled range and we have our canned range. The bottled beers are what we started with, you know, back 3 years ago. That's pretty much everything was in bottle at that stage. And I suppose at this stage, there may be the more traditional beers. So we have the Irish Red Ale, we have the Stout, we have a sort of traditional Pale Ale and a traditional IPA. And then maybe the canned range is slightly more modern style. So we have the sort of the Hazy Pale Ale, the Peach and Passion Fruit Pale Ale, the American Brown. And then we're also doing our limited edition series of cans as well. So what we're brewing today, what we're brewing tomorrow are numbers 2 and 3 in that series. And I think people actually really engage with that. So it's a beer that is a one-off. They're only going to be able to get it for a certain amount of time. It's probably something slightly different to anything else that's out there. And certainly the first batch that we did, which is a raspberry wheat beer, like that was, you know, a great reaction to that. And as I say, because that's it, like if you want to buy it, you have to buy it there and then. And that seems to work pretty well.
I suppose season plays into it a lot. You know, what's appropriate for the season. You know, how can we make a beer style? How can we make it our own? What's our kind of spin on it? Or sometimes it doesn't have to be a spin. A lot of it is just making really good, fresh IPAs. But yeah, a lot of it is just we come up with ideas, see what's gone well before, what do we want to change up, well, if there is a new style that we want to try. I mean, we kind of come up with it ourselves together, and then I work out together the details of the recipes, and you know, do a bit of research online and see how other people are making them, depending on if it's a brand new style or not. But yeah, I think it's mostly team effort.
We joked at the start that we never agree on anything, but one of the things that we all loved were hoppy beers, and that's pretty much, it's still true to this day. That's, although we've produced, you know, across the whole, well, a wide range of the beer spectrum, we're still very hop focused in the brewery, because they're the beers that we love.
And the beers that we couldn't get.
Exactly, and the beers that kind of got us into setting up the brewery. So I think, as Rich said, like if there's something interesting or something new, or it's like we try a beer, it's like, oh, that had this new hop in it or whatever, you know, can we get some of that? Or working with our suppliers, you know, very fortunate to have some really, really good suppliers that have absolutely top quality products, and they might come to us and say, listen, I've got my hands on some of this new hop or this new whatever. Do you want to try it? And we go, yeah. And Rich will go off and do his magic and say, right, we're going to throw that into a double IPA and it could work well with X or Y or Z. And we're also really fortunate to have a yeast lab as part of the analytics guys that we use just down the road in Newcastle, so they're like literally 4 minutes away.
Yeah, he has anything a brewer could want in terms of yeast. It's great, and 10 minutes away.
And yeah, they're really innovating in the yeast space. So we won't go on about yeast because it's not very exciting to people who aren't necessarily brewers. But for a long time, people were just using dried yeast for repeatability, consistency, and to have somebody who's sort of innovating in that sort of space, and you know, the variety. I think he said he's got over 1,000 different brewers yeasts on bank. So like, you know, like that, he'll ring Rich up and say, I have this new stuff. So that's you'd love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. I have this new yeast. Cool. But we'll try that. Try stuff like that.
Geek out about the science and work out what it could go well in. You know, there's a lot of new types of yeast coming out, which is great to try them out, and great that we can have the flexibility to just go for it and not even, you know, do a full batch. Don't worry about doing a pilot batch, but just chance it. And
Well, we don't really chance it.
We've got you, Rich. That's why we don't.
Due diligence, and we research it, as you say.
yeah.
Rich feels like he's chancing it. Someday you'll get caught, Rich.
Well, I suppose there's loads of different styles of beer is the first thing. So there's however many styles of beer you want, from pale ales to lagers, stouts, porters, and everything in between. So basically, I kind of brew beers that I enjoy to drink as well. I like the pale ale, I like ales, porters, stouts. So you pick a style. Every beer has a specification in terms of colour, bitterness, ABV, gravity. So it's really playing around with the specification to get a balance the way you like it. And you brew it a few times on a pile of kits and tweak it. Basically that's it. So it has a spec, and when you're brewing it, you're hitting the spec along the way. You know that that beer is going to be the way you want it to be. Water is very important, getting the balance of the water right. But that's how I develop a recipe. And so pick a style I like. So for example, an IPA, this rye IPA, we use a small bit of rye, but it's pretty bitter. It's about 60 IBUs, and we use a nice bit of rye, which gives a nice bit of a spicy taste to it. So it's all about the balance, really, getting the balance right, you know. And so yeah. So again, I have a lager. So this is a single malt lager. So it's a very simple beer to brew, but it's very easy to get it wrong. If this makes any sense, like there's only one malt, 2 hops, but lagers are very clean beers. So if any mistake is made along the way, it'll stand out a mile, you know. Whereas with an ale, more flavour, more complexity, you know, you can kind of hide your flaws a bit better. Yeah, so that's really it. Different styles, different specs, and yeah. What was the question again?
Well, I suppose the twist. So our first beer, this guy here is our flagship. This is the beer that we launched in the legendary Salthouse pub in Galway and the 57 Headline in Dublin in August 2014. It's called Sheep Stealer, and Sheep Stealer is the nickname for County Roscommon. Back in history, there's a couple of different versions of the story of how Roscommon people became known as the Sheep Stealers, but the local football team is the Sheep Stealers. That's their nickname. And I suppose that the story of Sheep Stealer is that recipe was originally developed in a garage in New York. And when we packed up in New York to come home, I had brewed a batch of that, and I put it into a corny keg, which is a 20-litre stainless steel keg. And it went in the container with all our other worldly possessions. And it went on a ship. I left New York on the heels of Hurricane Sandy. I was working over there. My wife had already left. I was finishing up a project, and everything, my entire world was put into a 40-foot steel box, and it went on the back of a lorry, and it left our place on a Friday afternoon. My wife was there at the time. She came over to help with the packing. She flew back to Ireland on Saturday, and I think Saturday night the lights went out. Hurricane Sandy hit, and I didn't have a candle. I didn't have a torch. I had a cup, a bowl, an air mattress, and a camping chair. And that was all that was left in the apartment. And my laptop, so that I could finish the project I was working on. And so the lights went out, and it was kind of like, what are we going to do here? But anyway, the keg of sheep stealer was sitting in a container, and it eventually found its way onto a ship, and it found its way across the Atlantic, and I think it was finally unloaded in Belfast, and from Belfast it was driven down to the little lane in Roscommon where we live now, and a 40-foot container blocked the entire road, and it was unloaded at light speed. It was probably a record set there. But that keg, I went rooting through the container like this, you know, the hell with the bed and the couch and the TV, you know, where's my flipping keg? And the keg came out and I tasted it, and it had matured quite nicely over the course of the sea voyage. And I said, yeah, that's the beer that we're going to brew. So it's got a base of Irish barley. It's 90, by ingredient weight, it's about 90% Irish barley. It also has a little bit of Irish wheat in it. And then there's a little bit of imported Belgian malt in it, a kind of malt that we just can't get in Ireland from an indigenous source. And obviously Irish water. And when we released it, it was kind of, 2014 was a great year because I spent the year basically planning my own brewery and driving around the country visiting other people's breweries. And there were, I don't know, 12 or 14 breweries that I went to visit that year, all of whom had a bit of history. They'd been in business for a year or more. So they had some sense of the lie of the land and the market, and they all said, what are you going to brew? And I said, I'm going to brew a Saison. And the universal response was, yeah, good luck with that. You know, off you go. Best wishes to you, but we won't be seeing you again. And I said, what? No, the Irish drinker's not going to drink a Saison. It's not going to happen. So in a little marketing twist, instead of calling it a Saison, we called it an Irish farmhouse ale. And a Saison is effectively a farmhouse ale, traditionally brewed in farmhouses and farming communities in the French-speaking part of Belgium. So Irish farmhouse ale because it's made in Ireland and it's made with Irish barley. And well, all I can say is it hit the ground running. You know, it really did. It took off. It was different. The label's a little quirky. My brother-in-law did the label for us. He's done all our original labels. And it was different. There was nothing else quite like it on the Irish market at the time. And does it sell like a session IPA with a salary's worth of hops in each can? No, it doesn't. But it sells perfectly happily for us. It's been exported to the US. It's gone to Sweden. It's gone to France. It's gone to Italy. It's gone to the UK. It's even gone to Lebanon. So, you know, it's worked very well for us. I'm very happy with it. It's got a good long shelf life. It's 100% bottle fermented, re-fermented. And it goes fantastically well with food. And I love to eat, I love to cook, I love to prepare food. I never really wanted to be a chef. I never wanted to work in a kitchen. If you've ever been in a commercial kitchen, that's another vocation. You kind of have to want to be there. But brewing sort of checks those boxes for me. It allows me to prepare and produce what is, in my book, is a food product. But I'm not sitting there at 11 o'clock at night scrubbing the smell of onions and garlic out from under my fingernails, which is, you know, that's the downside of being a chef, I suppose.
We have grown hops on a small scale, but in Ireland, hop growing was huge. Obviously back in the day, but then markets and monopolies put an end to that. But so yeah, we brew with our own malt and barley. It's grown here. It's consistently good quality. Ian grows on the farm here, and we use our own water too, which is just as critical. Like, you know, it's not treated. There's no chlorine. There's no anything. It's really good quality. So it's ideal for brewing. Very little you have to do with it. You know, it's raw water, very good. So that's just as critical. Like, you know, beer is 95% water. We use our own malt then, which gives us the extract for the alcohol. Yeah, it's sustainable. It's grown here. It's brewed with here. So you know, very very sustainable. Yeah, that's kind of our unique selling point, I suppose. We don't grow the hops, but the hops used to be grown, but it's very low yielding crop, so you need big acreage and big drying facilities and processing to get to. So maybe one day it'll come back. I know there's guys, Wicklow Wolf and David does a bit up in Ballykincammon. He does a wet hop here every year, so it is coming back a little bit. Like maybe if a bit of help from government and Teagasc and Department of Agriculture might see it come back a bit more, hopefully. But yeah, that's important. It's our USP, I suppose, and yeah, we're fairly proud of it.
I think I was probably, because we're using our own barley and our own water, I think I was always interested to try using our own hops as well. So we do have, it's a small hop garden, and we did grow a lot of hops in Ireland in the past, but I think the climate really isn't as suited to a lot of other places in the world at the minute. But we wanted to try and grow our own hops to a certain extent, and then we do produce one beer every year, which is all our own barley, all our own hops, and all our own water. Now, we were very lucky. We picked them about a week ago. We got a really fantastic day for it, whereas we were meant to pick them yesterday, but actually yesterday was horrific. It was wet, it was horrible and cold. But because we had a couple of storms back in July, sorry, it wasn't July, it was September, they knocked the plants around a little bit and the hops needed to be picked a week earlier, so we got lucky with that. But I think it's just nice to be able to try and do as much locally as possible. Like that'll be always our thing, is to try and support other local businesses. So whether the branding or the haulage or anything else, try and support other local businesses. But then also to get as much of the ingredients locally as possible. So like for that one beer of the year, it's everything within 500 metres of the brewery. So the well is just out in the yard out here, the barley's grown in the field just across from the brewery, and the hop garden is just out in the back of the house. So it's just a nice way of being able to make a really local beer that, if you're talking about terroir, you're talking about the taste of the farm here, that's as close as you can get because everything's coming from within very close to the brewery. We kind of put everything into the hop garden because we wanted to see what would grow and what would be successful. So we did put a lot of traditional varieties in there that that kind of would have been grown in Ireland and even these days down in Kent as well, down in England. So we have Northern Brewer, we have Fuggle, Goldings. Cascade actually works really well for us, even though I'd say that's a North American hop rather than necessarily a traditional hop for here. But it produces the most cones anyway. I don't think you probably get the same intensity of flavour out of it grown in Ireland as you would in the American Northwest, but it actually produces a lot of cones for us. We've put in some Centennial now, which should be a really nice hop. It's kind of a souped up Cascade, or maybe even heading towards a Citra type hop, so more citrusy flavours rather than necessarily the grapefruit that you get out of the Cascade. It's only in this year, so it'll be next year really before it produces any cones, and then maybe the following year we might get a decent yield out of that. We have a little bit of Saz out there as well, which would be more a lager hop necessarily than an ale hop, but again it'd be interesting to see if that does anything. And then we have a couple of German bittering hops, so we have some Galena and some Hercules out there as well, which they're very dependent on the year. Sometimes this year they did pretty well. Last year they didn't do an awful lot. So the Northern Brewer is really what we're relying on for the bittering hop, and then everything else is kind of the flavour and the aroma. Well, to be honest, what we do is we make what we call our fresh hop beer. Drying hops is a bit tricky because you have to dry them really quickly because they're 80% moisture, but you have to dry them very gently because you don't want to drive off the essential oils and everything else that's in them. So we actually pick them and they're in the kettle 2 hours later. So there's no chance for any mold or anything like that getting in on them, and we can just brew with them straight away, brew with them within the day, and then they're done. So we don't have to worry about either drying them or storing them. So we do, this year's obviously been a bit trickier, but generally what we'll do is we get maybe 20 or 30 volunteers in, they come in, we cut the hops down, they pick them, and then we're brewing at the same time here, and then by the time the hops come in, we're ready to actually put them into the kettle, weigh them out and put them into the kettle, and then the hop pickers get a bit of a barbecue and a few beers afterwards. So it works really well. It's a nice day out for everybody. It's always a day that's oversubscribed, like we can never actually get everyone in here who wants to come and do it, but it's a couple of hours of gentle hop picking, and apart from the fact that your hands are stuck together with the lupulin and you smell of hops for about a week afterwards, it's fine. It works quite well.
Yeah, well, water is it's crucial to brewing. Now I suppose we're not entirely unique, but this story may well be unique, certainly in the Irish brewing world. So where we sit on top of a big limestone area. So the water that comes out of the ground here is ferociously hard alkaline water. You know, I often joked that we could do a sideline selling limestone chips because we were scraping them off the insides of vessels and that all the time. But the recipe was tweaked and tailored because the recipe that was originally developed in New York. New York water is it comes down through granite, and it is pure. There's very little in the way of minerals in it. It's great lager brewing water. Great brewing water, full stop, because you can tailor it to be just about anything you want. But my kind of take on it is we want to brew very traditionally. We want to brew old school, and you know, our kit is very manual. So we tailor our recipe to suit the water rather than the other way around. And when I brought the recipe over from New York, we obviously trial brewed it a couple of times on the small kit, on the homebrew kit. And what we had to do was counter the alkalinity of the local water. So we put a good portion of what's called sour malt or acid malt in there. You can buy a drum of food grade sulfuric acid and you can dump it into your brew, but you know, that's not really what we want to do. So by tweaking the recipe a little bit of colored malt, a little bit of sour malt, we kind of got it where we wanted it to be. And then about 2 years ago, so when we set up the brewery, there was a boil water notice in the area. That wasn't an issue for us brewing because everything's boiled anyway, and then the final product is saturated with alcohol and carbon dioxide. So you know, it's a pretty safe product in that respect. But the local water authority decided after a while that they couldn't cure the cause of the boil water notice. So rather than try and fix it, they just tapped into a different water source. So virtually overnight, we went from a hard alkaline water source to a soft acidic water source. And they didn't tell us. They said they told us, but they didn't tell us. And we started brewing one day, and our pH readings were off and our colors were a little off. And I was kind of like, what's going on here? And just so happens that they were digging up the water main outside the brewery. And I went out and I said, there's different waters. Water's changed. I know you were talking about bringing it in from Loch Mask. When does that happen? Oh, that happened 2 weeks ago. So we had to go through a whole kind of reset, and the water we're getting now is arguably better brewing water. It certainly makes cleaning a hell of a lot easier. But we had to go through the recipes sort of one by one and tweak them and change them, because the biggest changes, I suppose, were in bitterness, perceived bitterness in the final product. One beer in particular we haven't really brewed since the water changed because we trialed it a couple of times. I wasn't happy with the result. And again, we don't want to be dumping chemicals and stuff like that into the beer. If we can't fix it using natural ingredients, then we can't fix it. And so we haven't fixed it to my satisfaction yet. So that beer has been in very short supply for the last couple of years. But for our Saison brews, the lager that we produce, our wild beers that we produce, our long-aged beers that we produce, the new water, yeah, we've adapted and it's working very well for us now. And like I say, it saves a bloody fortune in time and cleaning stuff on getting all the lime scale off the tanks, because that's not a problem anymore.
Yeah, it is. It's for me, it's two things. Like it's the passion about beer making. So you want to make a really good product. You want to make sure that people are really enjoying the beers. And it's also, for me, it's also about looking after the farm and looking after the family history as well. So it's trying to do something that I suppose it raises the profile of the place so that people want to come and visit us, because the next stage for us is to get the tourism product really up and running. And it's about trying to share the history and everything that we have here, because I do find when people come in here, they're interested to talk to someone who has, is part of the family and has that sort of connection with the past. So particularly we get, say, the American market coming in here, American tourists, and you start talking about 1639, and even the yard that was built out here was built in about 1780, so pretty much when the Declaration of Independence was over there. They really like that connection, they like that sort of historical thing, and the continuity, the fact that the family's been here for so long. So it's a combination of that, and then the passion of brewing with our own barley as well, the fact that we spend the best part of a year getting that barley right. And then, to spend all that time on it, and then we can get it back into the brewery and we can actually brew with it. For me, I find that's great. That's hairs up on the back of the neck every time we're starting to put some of our own malts into the brewery.
I suppose it is, yeah. I enjoy it because it's not for the money anyway, that's for sure. But yeah, I enjoy it. It's hard work. It's But it's good, yeah. I mean, you get to make a beer, you have something tangible at the end of the day that you said you produced this from your own ingredients, you know. It's and this area, I suppose, the Barrow Valley area is historically has a history of malt and barley. Like the canals were built and all the barley was grown in, because it's a really good climate is obviously ideal, and the soil type is renowned, this area for malt and barley. So we've really good ingredients, good water, good hygiene, good sanitation, and good equipment. You know, it's easy to make good beer with good ingredients. So we think we have good products, but yeah, it's fun.
Oh yeah, it's almost a vocation, because if we were in this for the money, we would have quit a long time ago. And funnily enough, I was looking at a graphic just recently of Irish craft brewery logos, and it struck me, the first thing that struck me was how many of them are not with us anymore. You know, we've been in this business for 6.5 years. And in that 6.5 years, we've gone from the year we opened, 2014, I think by the end of the year, there was somewhere in the high 20s of breweries, 27, maybe 30 tops. We reached a peak at one point in time of over 100. Now I think we're somewhere back into the 70s in actual physical independent breweries in Ireland. So we've gained a lot, but we've lost a lot of breweries as well. And I kind of looked at the list of breweries that are no longer with us. And some of them, they just ran out of passion, or they ran out of money. But a lot of them, they were open for all the wrong reasons. They were opened as a business. And it is a business. I understand it's a business, and people need to get paid, and we need to be able to keep the lights on and buy malt and whatnot. But ultimately, we're about the beer. The beer is what drives us, not the profit. If we make a profit, happy days. But people who know me any length of time will tell you I'm kind of cantankerous, and I'm not a good employee. And there's probably some people who say I'm not a good employer either, but that's for that's for another time. But the reality is I'm not a good employee. I don't take direction from third parties very well. And so consequently, I had to work for myself. And what better than working in something that I'm deeply passionate about, something that I get up in the morning, and there's some mornings I get up and it's dark and it's wet and it's cold, and you know, there's physical labor waiting as soon as the key is turned in the door, and the forklift is leaking hydraulic oil, and the freaking compressor's not working, and the hot liquor tank is not hot, and you know, all these kind of things that come with running a brewery. But at the end of the day, I got the biggest beer fridge in the county, you know. I mean, what's not to love about that?
Yeah. Well, when I was started into brewing, I remember our lecturer telling us that if you're going to get into brewing, I hope you like cleaning, because it's 90% cleaning. If you don't have your hygiene, you know, that's critical, you know. And it's so easy to make, you know, and not clean something properly. But we're lucky with good tanks here, and it's easy to clean them, good CIP system. But yeah, that's just critical, you know. But after that, good ingredients, you know, good ingredients, good water. Make sure the water is right. That's basically the starting point. If your water's not right, your beer's not going to be right. End of the story. You know, so that's it. Get the water right.
Well, it's the one thing that every home brewer is told 100 times, and half of them don't listen to, is sanitize, sanitize, sanitize. Cleanliness is next to beerliness. And if your equipment isn't clean, you're losing control. Now, there's a certain style of brewing, and it's a highly revered style of brewing, wild, spontaneous kind of brewing, where you want whatever microbes are in the air to come in and effectively infect your wort and turn it into beer. But there's a very good chance that what infects your wort is going to produce something that you're not going to want to drink. You wouldn't even want to put it on your chips. You might strip paint with it, but you know. So if you want control of your process, you have to start at zero effectively. And in this day and age, you can get a small, and I don't advocate this necessarily, but if you want to, you can get a kind of an under-counter RO filter, which will produce you water that consists of hydrogen and oxygen and nothing else. And then you can do whatever you want to that base unit, and you can make it like Pilsen water, you can make it like Burton water, you can make it like Dublin water, whatever you want, Dortmund. And there you have the building block to start putting your recipe together. But our kind of way is to embrace what we have So we started out with hard alkaline water. Now we have soft acidic water. We can still produce effectively the same beers. They have changed slightly, but I don't think too noticeably so. But that's, that again, that's part of being a small craft or artisan brewer. It's my thought that the only way to get absolute consistency in a food product, whether it's a drink, whether it's a hamburger, whether it's a loaf of bread, a pack of sweets, whatever it is, the only way to get consistency across that day in, month, year, from continent to continent is by massive production and continuous blending. That's the only way. That's why when you buy a Big Mac in New York, you buy a Big Mac in Dublin, you buy a Big Mac in Tokyo, it basically tastes the same. Whereas you buy a steak in New York, a steak in Dublin, a steak in Tokyo, you got 3 different meals. And so, if you want to go down that consistency thing, that's industrial. There was no consistency in anything prior to the Industrial Revolution. And we don't brew industrial beer, we brew artisanal beer. So, most of the changes are going to be non-detectable because our process is consistent. But from day to day, the air temperature is a little bit higher, so the mash temperature is a little bit higher. The grist, the grain temperature was higher going into the mash tun, so the mash is a degree higher. We don't have the technology, the automation to control our grist and our air temperature and air humidity and all that kind of stuff. So there could be minute variations from batch to batch, but that's part of what is being an artisanal producer. You don't put an oak floor in a room because every board looks the same. You put an oak floor, you want every board to look the same, buy a plastic floor. If you want every meal to be the same, eat fast food and drink macro industrial produced drinks. If that's who you are, that's who you are. That's well and good, we each march to our own beat. But for us, we're all about a little bit of variety, provenance, and I would say to the home brewer, if you're going to take the time and spend the effort to make your own beer, make your own beer. Don't mimic, don't necessarily try and copy, don't get hung up on BJCP style guidelines and that kind of thing. Brew something that you and your friends and whoever are going to enjoy. Brew the best beer you can using the best ingredients you can. Don't get hung up on the nitty gritty, on the little bits and pieces. If you're all about entering competitions, then so be it. Maybe you need to get hung up on those little bits and pieces, but otherwise you need to enjoy it. Yeah.
I think, okay, so obviously Ireland has a reputation abroad for being the home of beer necessarily now, and I think from that point of view, that's one thing we have. The other thing we do have, to be fair, we do grow really, really good malting barley here. Now the Belgians will tell you they grow really good malting barley as well, and they do, and the French probably do as well. But Ireland, and particularly the bit of Ireland that we're in, is really, really good malting barley territory. We have the climate for it, we have the soils for it. So if we can brew our own beers using our own Irish barley, I think that gives us sort of an edge that other people don't necessarily have.
Like I was saying, I suppose ingredients. Ireland is renowned for the quality of its malt and barley. The climate is ideal, the soil type. So we've really good malt and barley. As well as that, I suppose. You say anyone can call anything craft. You're right. Craft doesn't really have a definition. That's the problem. Microbrewery has a definition in terms of revenue, and so crafty, I suppose, is another word. But it's all about the story and the provenance, and I suppose that's what you're doing, going around to these microbreweries in Ireland, and it's great to see. So I think that's what differentiates us, than the bigger breweries and bigger brands. But yeah, that's it really.
Well, we have a history, good, bad, or otherwise. We have a history of, we are a beer nation. We have this reputation, wherever you go in the world, you ask people, Irish, oh yeah, pint, we go for some pints. That's kind of who we are. We're crack. We like to drink, we like to party, we like to have a bit of fun. And that's, I suppose, reputation when we go overseas, when we go to France or somewhere like that to try and introduce our products, we're looked on favorably, because it's not like we're a nation with a reputation for product A and now we're trying to sell product B. We have a reputation for product B being beer. And these Irish guys, yeah, they know how to brew. You know, the French in particular, they have this kind of view of the Irish. They think we're all kind of sort of either druids or leprechauns like this, but that we're all master brewers. And look, let's play to that reputation. We go over there. If that's what they want to feel about us, you know, it's not a negative necessarily a negative connotation. But yeah, I mean, we're a beer nation. We should freaking embrace that. We should be proud of it. Otherwise, you know, like I say, we got great barley. We export barley. Ireland is an exporter of malting barley. I would suspect now that the vast majority of Irish breweries, independent and otherwise, the industrial ones too, are using Irish barley. So that's something pretty unique. We happen to be in that sort of geographical and climatic sweet spot for good barley production. We got, for the most part, good water. And yeah, we infuse a lot of crack into every bottle. Wait a minute, no, that's probably, no, scratch that.
I don't know if I have any one particular beer. I mean, we've brewed a triple IPA there. That's kind of where I would like us to be in that space, and pushing the boundary. How high we can go would be something that I've expressed an interest in before, to see what kind of ABV we can get out of our kit. So certainly something like that would interest me. Yeah, a big, very big beer.
We haven't done a barley wine yet.
Or a barley wine.
Do you mean personally, like to drink, or for a brewery point of view, or either?
To brew.
To brew, yeah. I think it's not something that I think we'll probably ever do, but I absolutely love the lambic styles and the gooses and stuff like that. But I mean, that's almost like winemaking, where you're mixing a 3-year-old beer with a 1-year-old beer, and it's, you know, generations of skill passed on. So if we could do something like that, for me, that would be amazing. I don't know if that's going to be something that we ever do, but I'd like to do some barrel aged stuff.
Yeah, I kind of be the same, like mixed culture fermentations. You know, spontaneous fermentations would be cool to kind of get yeast from our surroundings and microorganisms from the surroundings. But again, that's less of a brew and more of like a program of
Yeah, exactly.
over a long period of time.
You're managing the barrels, the baby barrels, for years.
Yeah, that would be.
That would be
That's
seriously
great,
cool,
that
and
would.
it's something that we haven't done.
Probably if I could do, see, it's hard. I do love a good nitro stout. So if I could do, but it's selling it. It doesn't. We can't package it properly. Like, so if we could do a really good nitro red ale. I know there's a good few around. White Gypsy have a great one. O'Hara's have a really good one. Yeah, that would be. But you need tap space for those kind of beers, you know. So you need lots of taps so you can sell it. We have a few. Our pale ale goes well. I do like IPAs, but yeah, I love to do a good nitro stout or nitro red ale. It's on the list.
Of our own.
Yeah.
The American brown, I think probably, it's funny because it's horrible outside. It's not something a bit warming and you know, there's a sort of autumn style beer, I suppose, at this stage. It's funny because it's a beer. It's a wildly untrendy beer style in a way. It's not as untrendy as the red ale, which I also love, but it's just that lovely malty, rich malty flavour. There's a bit of hops in there, but it's probably more about the malt than anything else. Now in the summer, I probably either the lime blocker or the peach and passion fruit. So again, the sort of the paler ales that have the lime blocker has a fair bit of hops in it. The peach and passion fruit has the fruit in it, and they're again just nice, sit out in the sunshine and enjoy the beers. But actually, at the minute, it's sitting up in front of a nice warm fire and getting a nice American brown out, I think.
Market notwithstanding, if economics, because ultimately, yeah, we have to pay some attention to the economics of production. I suppose it would probably be something like a Belgian strong golden ale, or maybe a triple, something like that. And we haven't brewed one of them simply because we distribute primarily in the west of Ireland in Connacht. There would be a very limited market for a beer like that. Although there is one being produced out in Westport, very good one. But it's a pretty niche product. it would be. It's a long time to get one right. There's a lot of maturation involved, a lot of aging and that kind of thing. But I suppose from a perspective, it's not a particularly challenging beer to brew. It's definitely a yeast-focused beer, yeast and malt, which is what we do, and I think which is what we do best. So that would be one. And I'm thinking from that perspective, from my own, this is what I would like to have a fridge full of. From a perspective of a challenge, it hasn't happened yet, and I'm saying yet because I just don't think that the business has been in the right place to do it. But it's always been in my mind to put in what's called a coolship. And a coolship is a device. So when we brew, we boil the wort, we then put it through a plate chiller, which cools it very rapidly. We then inoculate it with our yeast, and our yeast goes to work. With the coolship, it's kind of like a big open bathtub, if you will. And you run the beer into it hot, straight from the kettle, and you just leave it to cool down naturally. And again, whatever microbes are in the air will inoculate that beer and start to ferment it spontaneously. And so you don't really know what you're going to get. It's going to vary enormously with the seasons. Now it's very much a Belgian technique. It was probably used everywhere back in the old days before there was efficient cooling and refrigeration. But it's something that I've always wanted to do, and I just haven't got around to it. Kind of never say never. We did sort of go down that road in 2017. So we used to get asked questions, why brew a Belgian Saison in Ireland? And my response to that, without any basis in fact, it was just an answer was, well, there's no reason to suggest that Irish brewers weren't brewing a beer like that 200 years ago. We just don't know. We don't have a record of it. And what defines a Saison in my mind is the yeast character. And the yeast should be, I think, a diastatic yeast. And a diastatic yeast is a yeast that eats everything, basically. It consumes all sugar. It leaves you with a very dry beer. But it also, in the process of doing that, it produces a lot of flavors, a lot of phenols, a lot of esters. The kind of thing that most industrial brewers are mortally scared of. That's what they don't want in their beer, because it's going to produce character. It's going to produce something that some people are going to take and they're going to go, oh, geez, no, I don't like that. And, the industrial brewers are about selling volume. They want a flat line that's not going to offend anybody. So that's not what we're about. So anyway, asked why we produced this beer in Ireland, and the missing link was the yeast. There was no known Irish yeast that would produce that characteristic. So in 2017, we went out to see if we could find one. And that was kind of step one on our wild sort of spontaneous brewing thing. Was to go out and see if we could find an Irish diastatic yeast strain that would produce the characteristic that we looked for in a Belgian commercial yeast strain. And we found it. In 2017, we went to a cave not far from the brewery, and around the mouth of the cave, we harvested some blackberries, and there was some St. John's wort berries and bits and pieces in the hedgerow. I had a pretty good idea that if we found this yeast, we were going to find it growing on the skin of a fruit somewhere. And got the samples, sent them away to a lab in Dublin, up in IT Tala. They'd isolated the microbes that were grown on the skins of the fruit. We grew them up. We assayed them for ethanol and carbon dioxide production. We selected 3 strains. We grew them up further. We brewed with them, tasted them and saw how they performed and whatnot. And we selected a winner. We have a winner. We call that yeast Morrigan 1, because the cave that it came from back in Celtic mythology was legend, had it that was the lair of the Morrigan, who was this shape-shifting demon, goddess, warrior kind of thing. And the resulting beer was this one here. Well, if you can see, that's Underworld, because it came from the cave, Savage Ale, because it's wild. And that is, to all intents and purposes, that's an Irish Saison. That was kind of our vindication. So that's the kind of thing that keeps me interested. Even, we've brewed, I don't know how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of liters of sheep steel, or millions of bottles of it. And I still love it, and I still have a fridge full of it at home. But it's kind of going off on these tangents, a voyage into the unknown, so to speak. We didn't know what we were going to get. We employed the lab down in Tala because they had the proper protocols to ensure that we didn't pull out, the Roscommon Ebola from the depths of this cave. And there were a few things that came out of the cave that they said, no, those went into the incinerator straight away. There were some viruses and moles and whatnot. But the yeast we got, we then, after brewing with it for a while, we sent it to a lab for further analysis to see what it was. And we didn't hear from them for a while, and we followed up and we said, have you done the DNA test on the? Yeah, we did, but it didn't match anything. So we sent it to another lab who has a bigger database, and eventually they came back to us, and I was sitting kind of giggling like a kid, when I got the news that this yeast, in a database of thousands of strains of yeast, it didn't match any of them. It was a 95% match for some of them, but it was a 100% match for none of them. So it was effectively a new strain that hadn't been described before. Now, the nature of yeast is it reproduces so quickly that it morphs and it mutates fairly quickly. So, we weren't about to name a new organism that had never been discovered before. But the fact of the matter is that, we went to some yeast banks that work with big breweries and they'd never seen this particular strain before. And that we can say that is 100% absolutely unique to us. And the story behind its kind of discovery and all blew up a little bit, and we got a lot of coverage around the world on it. And it's actually just won a gold medal at the International Beer Challenge 2020, as did Sergeant Jimmy. So that kind of stuff keeps me going, and I would love to do a bit more of that, wild yeast and spontaneous fermentation and alternative sources of carbohydrate. We brewed a stout here on a pilot basis using roast potatoes, and we haven't brewed it commercially because it would, you'd almost bring your pillow and your alarm clock with you because it was so bloody slow to produce, because the starches were very slow to convert. Now, I think we could probably speed it up a little bit, mixing in different type of barley, and it wasn't all potato, but it worked very well because the potatoes actually substituted the way I prepared the potatoes. The potatoes substituted for 3 different types of barley malt in terms of color and flavor and texture and body in the mash. But it still took forever and a day for those starches to get converted to a point that the yeast could actually eat them. But, that's something I'd like to do on a bigger scale. There's no limits, do anything. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we were chatting about that earlier, how accessible the beer is across Europe and the UK, the tap rooms and the licensing and stuff like that, and how important that is for the industry, for the public to be able to walk into their local brewery,
And
chat
talk
to
to the brewer, like.
chat to who's behind it, exactly, the brewer, how it's made, the process, and then taste it and walk away knowing a lot more than they did. In Ireland, obviously that's not the case. It's far more difficult.
I think we were, like most people when they set up a business, you're full of energy, full of enthusiasm, and probably a little bit naive, but certainly I was, about certain aspects of it, and we didn't realise at the time, because we were so excited and we were into the beer scene and we were chatting to people online and, talking to all the guys in the off license who were all similarly excited about it, and we're like, Jesus, all we need is somebody good to be producing this in Ireland and everyone will buy it, and we didn't kind of realise just how far behind at that time Ireland was, or the Irish taste, if you like, or the amount of people, let's say, that were that much into beer, compared to like in the States, who had the scene for so long, and in the UK, who have more relaxed regulations around selling it from the brewery and the local aspect, and just how big a stranglehold, I suppose, the big breweries have built up in Ireland, and how much people are kind of weaned on the black stuff, and it's sort of part of the national identity, and we didn't kind of realise, or I didn't, how difficult it was going to be to change people's minds. And that's something that we've tried to do since, and that's something that really all craft breweries have to do and have to have as sort of almost one of their, aside from producing great beer, we have to be educators and helping, bring the beer to people, tell them about it, tell them the story, tell them why it's better, tell them why unfiltered beer, unpasteurized beer is better, why your beer doesn't need to have a 2-year shelf life and be filtered to bits. As you said, the local aspect, educate people about that, because it's just,
You have to rebuild the beer culture.
yeah, the beer culture I'm not going to pretend to be an historian on it, but
Go on.
no, I won't. We've only got a short amount of time here with the lads, so we don't want to be here all day. But it was wiped out in Ireland. The independent beer culture completely wiped out, more than any other country, I would say. I mean, in the UK, all industries are dominated by the big players. That's the same in almost any industry. But in the UK, they still, I mean, there's massive breweries in the UK, but they still had that sort of local, regional brewery that, you know, if you go to a particular place in the north, there'd be a local brewery or a regional brewery that people sort of identify with. In Ireland, we pretty much had one, and then more recently, maybe 2 or 3 big brands. And I think the guys certainly looked at what had happened in the US with the craft beer sector of the beer market growing from a couple of guys with some pots and pans to 15% of the market, or maybe more, and something similar happening in the UK. And you know, they definitely weren't going to give it up as quickly in Ireland. So I think we're only at about sort of 3% of the beer market here, and it's pretty tough to kind of break through that sort of.
Yeah, it's very slowly growing, but certainly nothing like we anticipated, or nothing like the projections that we were hearing at the time when we were setting up. It just hasn't. Whether it's down to education or, you know, accessibility.
We thought we were all going to have Rolls Royces, one each.
I wouldn't ever
And
buy a Rolls Royce.
We've only got one.
Yeah, I think it's probably, there was an initial wave about maybe, I suppose 8 or 9 years ago, something like that, and then there was kind of a little bit of a lull, and then we were kind of part of the second wave nearly, and I think we're back down into a little bit of a lull now. I mean, I think probably if you're coming into the market now, it's like, it is pretty saturated. You have to be honest about it. There's a lot of other people doing it. We'd like to think that we produce good beers, but a lot of other people are producing good beers as well. So you have to have something different to stand out, whether that's a really good brand or really different beers, you know, sort of a different style of beer than anyone else is producing. But you have to have something that's going to make you stand out against everyone else. And the competition is pretty intense. I mean, to be fair, everyone in the brewing industry is very friendly. Like, everyone will help you out, everyone will do what they can for you. But at the same stage, they want to sell their beer as opposed to you selling your beer. So you have to have some way of standing out, and you have to be able to get your beers out to as many people as possible. So the distribution is pretty important to get that right. And you know, dealing with some of the bigger breweries who are particularly, say, in the pub trade, we found it pretty hard to get beer in on draft in places, because there will be a certain amount of big brand beers in there, and they don't want you in there. I mean, it's a relatively small market compared to what they have, but they don't want any market loss. So that's where we've always struggled to try and break into that market. It worked out quite well for us in the pandemic, because actually the vast majority of what we produce is in bottles and cans, and that's what people were looking for back in the real height of the lockdown. But we'd still like to have as much beer on draft as possible, because hopefully, again, people will be able to walk into a pub and order a pint of it at some stage, whenever new normal turns back to more normal.
Are we at saturation? No. Well, we're close to it, but it's an artificial saturation. When I first did our business plan, and I was living in the States at the time, so I was a little detached from the Irish market, and I sort of looked at what had happened in the US, number of breweries per head of population, sort of tried to translate that into Ireland, but then also took into account beer consumption per capita, and we drink significantly more beer than they do in the States. So I worked out that Ireland could and should be quite easily able to support about 65 independent breweries. So, roughly 2 per county across the entire country, if you will. Turns out, when I did those numbers in the States, the number of breweries in the States has probably tripled since then. So, that would put us up around 180, 190 breweries in the country. I think that's probably a little too much, because we are a small market. But the problem in Ireland is that the market is absolutely dominated by 2 megalithic, massive, foreign-controlled conglomerations. And it's very, very difficult to compete with them. The practices that go on, Yeah, it's ferociously difficult. They have basically taken the Irish pub landscape. They've taken the publican out of the pub. Even though they don't own any pubs, it's not like in the UK where we have tied houses and that. They control the dispense, they control the cooling, they control the gas, and effectively they control the publicans in a lot of instances. So to get tap space in a pub in Ireland is ferociously expensive and difficult. Maintenance costs can be through the roof. And then unfortunately, the biggest sort of hurdle that I feel that we as an industry need to overcome is that there's still a massive portion of the population that just doesn't take beer seriously. Beer is a fizzy utility intoxicant that you drink until you fall over, and that's kind of all it is. And it's never it's not in the industrial brewery's interest to ever elevate it beyond that status. And yet, it doesn't need to be some frou-frou, drinking it in a stem glass with your little finger out like this. You can still sit back and drink it by the pint and enjoy it, but it doesn't need to be, the liquid equivalent of a Big Mac. If you like a steak, you like a chop, you like a nice piece of fish or a prime cut of meat, or you get your vegetables from the local farmer's market, you'll appreciate variety, you appreciate quality, you appreciate provenance. And people will go to great lengths to seek out the latest Chilean Merlot or New Zealand Sauvignon or whatever they produce like that. And they just walk right past the beer selection. And if you look at your average supermarket or off-license of that in Ireland, who 5-6 years ago had every beer on the shelf was an industrial beer produced by a multinational corporation. And now you look at the variety, and even here, the super values on either side of us here in rural Roscommon, there's probably 10 or 15 independent Irish breweries in each of those super values. They're showing phenomenal support to the industry. But we sort of need to get that through to the consumer, that this is not marking you as anyone or anything in particular other than a person of taste and a person who appreciates quality, a person who appreciates local and provenance, and that, beer is beer. A good winemaker might get to make 30 vintages in his entire life. We can make 30 brews in a year quite easily, and some people make 30 brews in a week. But nonetheless, we're sourcing our ingredients locally, we're sourcing our labor locally, we're using because water is such a big part of beer, the water plays a big influence on the finished product. So I can tell you the recipe of Sheep Stealer, but if you go some other part of the country and brew it on a different water supply, you're going to get a different beer. So there is something to be said for local. It's, beer on an industrial scale in a green bottle that's filtered to within an inch of its life can be reproduced anywhere on the planet if you've got the right chemical engineers on board. But that can't. So, this is what we need to get people to realize, that craft beer, independent beer, local beer, whatever you want to call it, it's something of value. It creates employment in the community. It retains income in the community, and it's freaking tasty, pure natural. 5 ingredients in that, nothing more.
I don't know if it's saturated. People always want to drink beer, and craft beer is growing. It's very difficult. This kind of has a glass ceiling. It's very difficult to penetrate, into the mass market. The bigger breweries, the macro breweries have a tight hold. So it's difficult. Like, more people are getting into craft beer when they realise that, people are kind of afraid of it. They don't know what it is, and they think it's crazy strong beers that are going to leave you on the ground, But it's not like that. It's just all about flavour, really, and stories and brands and people, So it's easy to brew a really good beer, But is it saturated? I think there's room for more, but we need help, this is great. So we get a video out there and more people know about it and understand and maybe try it. Because when they try beer and they enjoy it, it's kind of hard to go back to the blander beers, So it's just about education and getting people to taste it,
I think, there's so many new breweries out there now. The big boys can't buy out everyone or close down everyone. I think we're probably past the stage where you're ever going to go back to being 2 or 3 breweries in the country again. Now, whether everyone who's in the industry at the minute is going to survive or not, I think that's probably more debatable. But enough people will survive. And what you'd love to see, I mean, every business plan in the country is based around the fact that the market's at 3% at the minute, but it'll surely go to 5%. It's been at 3% for a very long time, and it's not really shifting at the minute. If you could push it out to being a more, a bigger share of the overall market, that would make a huge difference to everybody. So there is a bit of collaboration that we are doing as independent breweries, but we still need to continue doing to make sure that actually the whole industry grows. It's not just my brand or your brand or anyone else's brand. The whole craft and independent industry does need to increase overall sales so that people. It's really getting people to say walk into the local pub and look for their local beer. It's not walk in and look for one of the big brands. It's come in and look for trying to support local Irish industries that are employing a lot of people out in a lot of the times out in rural areas or out in less developed areas. And if we can change that mindset, that'll go a long way towards it. Because we do tastings where we'd go in and say we'd have our red ale and we'd give people the red ale and they'd say, "Well, that's lovely," and then they'd go up and order a big brand red ale. So it's muscle memory, and like people know what they like, and to be fair to the big breweries, they put out consistent beer all the time, but it's just trying to persuade people to give the smaller local brands a bit of a chance, and then if they like them, to stick with them.
I think people buy into the brand and learn a bit about craft beer breweries. I think it's easy to spot a big brand masquerading as a small craft brewer. I think a lot of people, if you're going to pay a premium for a good product, you're going to look into it and learn a bit about the story behind the brewery and build a little bit of a relationship.
I think a lot of the time when something blows up as quick as the craft beer did, people will immediately think it's going to be a fad or it's going to blow over just as quick as it came up. I don't think that's the case. I think it might be, at a stage of saturation or almost saturation now, whereas the public hasn't, caught up with the level of breweries and beer being produced at the moment. But I think that'll come, and again, I think it's down to education and where we can help people understand the process and why we do it. Why does anyone produce anything locally? Why would you do anything?
I think there's a couple of things that have probably held back the growth. One being that for a long time, whether we like to admit it or not, there was a lot of average beer being produced in Ireland, and people kind of, coming off the regular beer, which is, 100%, it's like sliced bread, is completely reliable. You get the same thing every time. If you like it, it's going to be the same no matter when, and then you're kind of getting people to try and change their tastes, and then, some of the quality sort of way back was, not, it certainly wasn't very consistent, and people may have had a less than perfect experience with it. They're paying more money for it. Wasn't terribly exciting. We're back to talking about the beers that are being imported from breweries that were producing for a much longer time and were way ahead. So it at that point didn't really compare to bigger brands, and it wasn't there in terms of the flavor and the consistency for people. And also, while it's easy for us, I think I always have to kind of remind myself that we live in a little microcosm, a bubble of craft beer, and it's not the same for everybody else. Shelf space and tap space is absolutely at a premium. It's really difficult to get on tap, and it's really, really difficult to get on shelf, particularly in the multiple retailers and supermarkets. And the big brands and the big distributors have most of the shelf space already taken. So we've seen a huge amount of faux craft beers, as we'd say, coming from the big breweries, masquerading either as a sub-brand of the main one or as something completely different that's dressed up as a fake craft beer. And for the consumer who's going in every day and going, you know what, I'm kind of interested I like to get into craft beer and like to support the guys. Oh, great, I can get them in Tesco for €10. I'll pick up these. They're not craft beer at all. We were talking to a retired brewer from Guinness, and we're not pointing out Guinness or anything, but just from a point of a comparison, one brew house in Guinness produces in one brew our entire annual production, and they brew 8 times on that brew house every day.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we have to be educators, and this year in particular with the COVID situation has been very difficult because we can't get out and meet and greet our customers. I used to look on the beer festivals; they were almost my holidays. Because when you're self-employed, you don't always get holidays, small business like this. But going up to something like the Big Grill in Herbert Park in Dublin doesn't sound like everybody's idea of a good time, standing behind a bar in a park in a field effectively in the middle of Dublin for 4 or 5 days on end. But I used to love the Big Grill. That was kind of my festival of the year. And we do a festival in Westport and a few others around the country. But what is most importantly in Ireland is at the moment, we can't easily have a tap room or a bottle shop in a brewery. It's very, very difficult to do that, potentially cost prohibitive. Not to say we're not trying, we're working on it, but it's very difficult to do. So oftentimes our only opportunity to get out and meet and greet the public, the consumers, is at a festival. And because we haven't been able to do that this year, yeah, it's definitely put a hurt on things. It's taken some of the fun out of the business, but it's a very important educational tool, because that's when we get an opportunity to explain to people what's going on. And, people say, oh, that craft beer taste and what is this and what's that, and, discussing varieties, and you meet other brewers, obviously other colleagues in the industry, and you get to bounce a few ideas off them, and, and have a couple of beers at the same time. Let's not beat around the bush. We all like to have a few beers, but education's a huge part of the industry in Ireland, particularly right now, because it's kind of lacking, and it goes across all from the consumers through the retailers and the publicans and the chefs and everybody like that. We need to be our own kind of cheerleading squad, I suppose. Let people know who we are, what we do.
Yeah, I suppose it is, yeah. I mean, it's local as well. It's far more labour intensive than brewing in microbreweries. It's way more labour intensive. You can see out there how many lads are out there, but way more labour intensive than the bigger breweries. It's all about efficiency and the less staff. So microbrewing employs way more people than the macro brewing. So it's good for the local economy. It's good for employment. That can only benefit, the local economies. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for it. I'd probably be working in Dublin somewhere, So it's great. If people see the benefit of it, and as well as that, we have a kind of sustainable model here. We use our own barley. We brew with it. The spent grain is fed to the sheep. So it's kind of a full life cycle on the farm. So that obviously has benefits as well,
Yeah, I think so. There's two things for the future. I mean, the first thing is obviously to sell more beer, because we have to keep expanding how much we're selling to keep the place kind of ticking over and to keep the financial viability in it. We had a few export things lined up before the pandemic, which hopefully will come back on stream at some stage once things settle down a little bit more. But the other thing is the tourism side of things. So for here, it was always a sort of a joint thing of making beer, but also getting as many people in to see the place as possible. And the tour is kind of a mixture of the brewery, obviously, but then also the old yards and the history and the stories. Because people actually, it's not necessarily history they want, but they want stories. They want to hear about the ancestor who knocked over the ferry fort and was dead a couple of weeks later. And they want to hear about the corruption and the planning process that allowed us to build a big tunnel under the road. It's all the interesting ancestors that people are interested in. And then they get a bit of a brewery tour afterwards. They can, we can talk about the farming, talk about the actual brewing, and then they get a few beers as tasters when they go out. So, I think it works pretty well as a package. And certainly, we built it on the business model of a lot of overseas tourists coming in, so Americans coming in. I'm not fluent in French or German, but I can speak enough French and German that I can do the tour in either language. So they like getting it in their own language rather than through a translator. But I guess we're going to be probably reliant on the domestic market for next year, and we'll survive on that. That'll be fine. And then hopefully for the years after that, we'll start to get more tourists back in again.
Well, I don't know. We're at a point where you sort of growth is expensive. We grew nicely last year, 2019. We grew the business by about 16% at a time when the Irish craft beer market is not expanding rapidly. And I looked at that and what we did and how we did it and said, okay, we had new relationships with a French importer and an Italian importer. We were starting to make some good inroads into the restaurant market here in the west of Ireland. And we did practically all of that, selling 95% of our beer, domestic beer anyway, between effectively Athlone and Galway. We don't do an awful lot in Leinster. No reason other than the fact that it's too far to drive conveniently. We don't have a distributor. We distribute ourselves for the most part. We have one distributor who helps us out a bit in Galway, but otherwise we're effectively self-distributed for the bulk of our business. And so on the back of 2019, I said, right, I reckon, with the Italian and the French relationship and getting some more steam in the restaurant business, we can probably grow 20% in 2020. Well, yes, 2020. Whoever would have thought that frickin' 4 little digits, not even 4, it's 2 digits repeated, would have such a massive bloody impact on everything. There's one part of me feels almost fortunate to live through this and, having witnessed it and seen it and thankfully so far not have anybody close to me succumb to it. But, God, it's challenging, It is. It makes every day a struggle. It's dynamic. I used to do a bit of sailing. I was not a sailor, but a friend of mine had a boat and he needed some ballast on the deck. He used to race and I provided some of that ballast. And the thing that always amazed me about sailing was when you're racing anyway, every little puff and they're looking out and then there's a puff of wind there and there's a puff of wind. The wind is not a linear force. The wind is constantly changing. And I feel that's what 2020 is like. It's just blowing from every flipping direction at once and it's not blowing you anywhere you necessarily want to go and every frickin' turn is attack. And yeah, it's because, so the truth of the matter is I don't know. We're right now, I'm hoping, I know I mentioned it earlier, but I'm hoping to get a license to actually open a bottle shop here so that we can take a little better control of some of our retail so that we're not as reliant on third parties to get our product to market. Because right now, if somebody comes to the brewery and says they'd like to buy a case of beer, I can't sell it to them. If they're a publican or a otherwise retailer, I can sell it to them. But if they're the consumer, we can't. And so we're trying to get a license to circumvent that or to overcome that. But that's going to cost thousands just to go through the legal proceedings to get to the point where we can actually purchase the license. But if we can do that, we're on a main road. We get a lot of traffic passing the brewery every day. We don't even have a sign up right now because we are purely a production brewery. I've always wanted this to be a destination brewery, but legislation and planning permission and all were just in place that have prohibited that up until now. But because of the times we're living in, we have to start thinking outside the box. And, the prospect of growth and increasing capacity and increasing staff and all that just purely on a production basis is not, I don't think it's viable right now. But the prospect of growing and potentially increasing employment anyway by adding almost a side business, I don't anticipate we're going to see many foreign visitors in the next, certainly not over the winter. Next summer, I don't know, but if somebody is coming from Dublin to Westport for their holiday, there's 2 ways of getting there, and one of them is past our front door. And if they want to land up in Westport at the holiday home or the caravan or wherever it is they're going to with a nice case of local beer from Connacht that they can't get in Dublin, call in here. And you know what? If we're not too pressed for time, we'll give you a tour and show you around and show you where it comes from and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're doing this year that's a little different. But we've literally just fired the first shot. The planning permission has gone in. So where it leads us, there's a lot of bureaucracy to be overcome before we can do anything. But yeah, we'll plow ahead. And we kept ourselves lean during the lockdown. So we're not in a bad position, but for our industry, for the hospitality industry, the reality is the country right now, as we're filming this, is at level 3. But as far as we're concerned, we might as well be at level 5 because the pubs and restaurants are closed and they are the bulk of our outlet. off sales retail they've grown during the lockdown, but they haven't grown enough to make up for what we've lost in other outlets. And the fact that we've got no tourists coming through, because a large part of our business in summer, particularly here in the west of Ireland, was foreign visitors, Germans, French, Italians, Americans. They all want something local. You know, when they go overseas, they don't want what they can get at home, they want what they can't get at home. And so they made up for a massive part of our business in the summer, and that's been completely wiped out this year. So, but at the same token, we've been working on a reduced schedule, wage costs, salaries are down, production costs are down, the overheads are, the electricity is what it is, the rent is what it is, but we're going into winter, we're not in a terrible position, but we're just hoping that this thing is going to find some kind of a path, an even keel, so to speak, going into 2021, and we can get back to business and we can get back to planning. The hardest part right now is probably not being able to plan anything. Until I opened a brewery, my life philosophy was no planning, just execution. And that worked fine until we had a premises and we had investment and we had equipment and we had staff and we had customers and you need to be able to plan. And it doesn't come easy, it doesn't come naturally to me. And right now you can't plan, because you make a plan and it could be out the window the next day because, we're level 5. So yeah, I don't know. More gray hair.
I know, it's tough, but I suppose I got into this really, I said if I can make a living, I'd be happy, and I'm doing it at the moment, and a few lads part-time, and so we're lucky, we're doing okay. But yeah, we want to grow, so not too fast, but steady. And I compare myself with like the hare and the tortoise. I'm a bit like the tortoise, and there's a few lads flying past you, but that's okay, I don't mind. So just to keep steady, grow steadily, and get more export hopefully, and just keep a nice sustainable local business as well, and maybe employ a few more local people and just grow the brand. And yeah, that's it really.
I think I'm personally really happy with where we are. A lot of the relationships we've built, and the Off the Wall series is sort of growing legs. We've something that we've been working on over the last year, and it's kind of started really taking off pre-COVID, and it was really taking off, and it's starting to come back now as our export. So we've developed really strong relationships with really, really good distributors in key European markets. So we export to about 8 countries now. It's pretty small at the moment, but we know we've got the right partners, so there's huge scope there now. And that was really important for us to have those partners. So there's huge scope to grow Oh Brother and help put Irish beer and continue to put great Irish beer out there into the world. And there's great scope, I think, to continue with the collaborations. And it's like we said, from my point of view anyway, it sort of grows. It's like a rolling stone, somebody will recommend somebody will recommend somebody else, and then the next thing you know, you're working with the most famous artists in the world. But it's a bit like that, you get to work with people maybe down the road that you might have your eye on, that at the moment we might be a little bit too low profile for. But yeah, I think just I'm happy with everything we're doing. Certainly happy with the beers that we're producing. I think, well, I'd be remiss to say that I think they're amongst the best in Ireland, but I feel they are, and I still feel we have a good bit to do on that front. But definitely the trajectory for me is just keep doing more of what we're doing. We're having such a good time doing it. So what would you like to do, Rich?
Yeah, I think the export is definitely, there's such huge markets out there to get our beer out to, and yeah, I think the beer is well able to be up there with the best, so we just keep producing it and keep chugging away.
Keep pushing along, yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that, yeah. It's an exciting industry to be in, as we know. And it's constantly evolving, as Barry says, with COVID and stuff like that, we've had to deal with a lot recently. But again, it's the same for every business. Everyone has to just work through, and cut their cloth accordingly and do what they can do and work the angles. But certainly in general, it's a very exciting space to be in. So we
Yeah, I
continue
do
obviously
feel
to-
like I definitely think with COVID has kind of taken the wind out of a lot of people's sails, and there'll be an awful lot of businesses that will, you know, suffer. But in spite of that, and you know, even as things start to kind of open back up now, I really do feel the future is bright for us. Certainly, I'm very, very excited, and I think for good quality Irish beer, the future is very bright.